The moment everything shifted, the morning started like every other morning in Daniel Hayes' life. He woke up at 6, made breakfast for Mia, helped her pick out clothes that almost matched, and dropped her off at his neighbor's apartment. Mrs. Patterson was kind enough to watch Mia during job interviews, though Daniel knew he was running out of favors. He was running out of everything lately. The Brooks Industries building stood 40 stories high in downtown Chicago, all glass and steel reflecting the cloudy autumn sky. Daniel had worn his only suit, the one he'd bought 5 years ago for his brother's wedding. It pulled tight across his shoulders now, and the shoes pinched his feet. But he walked through those revolving doors like he belonged there. An interview that went nowhere. The facilities manager had barely looked at his resume. Daniel watched the man's eyes skim over the employment gap, the lack of recent references, the address in the cheaper part of town. The interview lasted 12 minutes. Daniel knew before he stood up that he wouldn't get the job. He walked back through the lobby, his jaw tight, trying not to think about the stack of bills waiting at home, trying not to think about how Mia needed new shoes and her birthday was coming up. He was so lost in his thoughts that he almost didn't hear it. The sound came sharp and sudden. A gasp. The skitter of heels losing purchase on marble. The beginning of a fall that would end badly. Daniel's body moved before his mind caught up. He lunged forward, his arms catching her, just as gravity claimed victory. They crashed against the wall together, his shoulder taking the impact. His arms wrapped around a stranger who smelled like jasmine and coffee, the woman who changed his life for 3 heartbeats. Neither of them moved. He could feel her trembling, could hear her breath coming fast and shallow against his chest. Her hair had come loose from its clip, dark waves falling across his arm. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked, his voice rougher than he intended. She pulled back slightly, looking up at him with eyes the color of honey. Her face was pale, but she was already trying to compose herself, to rebuild whatever armor had cracked in that moment of helplessness. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice shook. "Thank you." That was close. Daniel helped her stand, noticing the way she tested her ankle, the way her hands smoothed down her navy suit with practiced precision. She was beautiful in that untouchable way that women in power often were. Put together, polished, completely out of his league. "You're bleeding," she said, her eyes dropping to his arm. Daniel glanced down. His sleeve was torn, a scrape running from elbow to wrist where he'd hit the wall. "It's nothing," he said automatically. The revelation before either could say more. Security rushed over. A tall man in a dark uniform, his face creased with concern. "Miss Brooks, are you all right?" the guard asked urgently. Daniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. Miss Brooks. As in Brooks Industries, as in the CEO whose photo hung in the lobby, though he'd barely glanced at it. "I'm fine, Thomas," Natalie Brooks said, her voice steady now, professional. The moment of vulnerability was gone, locked away behind executive composure. "Thanks to this gentleman." Thomas looked at Daniel with new respect. "Sir, you may have just saved our CEO from a serious injury." Daniel wanted to disappear. He was suddenly aware of his too tight suit, his scuffed shoes. The fact that he'd just failed an interview in this very building. And now he was standing here, bleeding on the marble floor, while the most powerful woman in Chicago looked at him like he was a puzzle she wanted to solve. The card that changed everything. "What's your name?" Natalie asked. "Daniel. Daniel Hayes." "Well, Daniel Hayes." She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. It was heavy stock, embossed letters that caught the light. "Call me. I'd like to thank you properly." She pressed the card into his hand, her fingers warm against his palm. Then she was walking toward the elevators, her stride confident despite the close call. Daniel watched her go, the card burning in his hand like a promise or a threat. He couldn't decide which, the reality of going home that night. After picking up Mia and making dinner from whatever was left in the fridge, Daniel sat at their small kitchen table. The card lay between him and a stack of bills. Mia was in the living room, singing to her stuffed rabbit, blissfully unaware that they were 2 months behind on rent. He picked up the card, turned it over. No personal note, just her name and number in elegant script. Natalie Brooks, CEO. He thought about throwing it away. About the way her eyes had seen right through him, past the cheap suit to the desperation underneath. But then Mia called out, "Daddy, can we have pancakes tomorrow?" And he thought about all the times lately he'd had to say no. No to new shoes. No to the school field trip. No to everything that cost more than their survival. The call that took courage Daniel called the next evening after Mia was asleep. His hand shook as he dialed. The phone rang once, twice, and he almost hung up. Then her voice came through, clear and professional. "Natalie Brooks, this is Daniel Hayes," he said. "From yesterday? The staircase." There was a pause, and he could almost hear her smile. "I was hoping you'd call. Can you come to my office tomorrow at 10? "I don't know much about corporate work," Daniel admitted. "I'm not offering you corporate work," Natalie said. "Just come, and bring your daughter if you need to." I remember seeing her in the lobby. The call ended, and Daniel sat in the dark apartment, hope flickering in his chest like a candle that might blow out any second. He didn't know what Natalie Brooks wanted. But for the first time in months, tomorrow felt like it might hold something other than rejection. Walking into a new world the next morning, Daniel dressed Mia in her best dress, the yellow one with flowers that she loved. He combed her curly hair, kissed her forehead, and took the train downtown. In the elevator up to the executive floor, Mia held his hand tight. "Is the pretty lady from yesterday going to be there?" Mia asked. "Yes, baby." "Is she a princess?" Daniel looked down at his daughter's hopeful face and felt his throat tighten. Something like that. The elevator doors opened, and Natalie Brooks was waiting. She wore a gray suit today, her hair pulled back, but when she saw Mia, her whole face softened. "You must be Mia," Natalie said, crouching down. "I'm Natalie." "Do you like art?" Mia nodded shyly, clutching her rabbit. "Good, because my office has a whole wall you can draw on if you want." Then Natalie looked up at Daniel, and in her eyes he saw something unexpected. Not pity, not charity, but recognition, like she saw someone who understood what it meant to carry weight alone. "Let's talk," she said simply, and Daniel followed her into an office that overlooked the entire city, into a conversation that would rebuild his life piece by piece, into a future he'd stopped believing existed. Neither of them knew it yet, but that moment on the stairs had been the beginning of something neither could have planned, something real. A job that felt like hope. Natalie's office was nothing like Daniel expected. Yes, there were floor-to-ceiling windows and modern furniture, but there were also books stacked on every surface, a coffee mug with a chipped handle, and photographs that looked personal rather than professional. She gestured for him to sit while Mia explored, her small fingers tracing the edge of a glass sculpture. "I need someone I can trust," Natalie began, leaning against her desk. "Someone who doesn't flinch when things get complicated. Someone who understands what it means to show up every day, no matter what." Daniel nodded slowly. "That sounds important. But I should be honest with you. I don't have any experience in this world." "I'm not asking for experience," Natalie said. "I'm asking for reliability. I need a driver, someone to handle logistics, occasionally help with security at events. The salary is $75,000 a year with full benefits." The number hit Daniel like a physical force. He'd never made more than $40,000 in his best year. He thought about Mia's shoes, about the overdue rent notice, about all the nights he'd lain awake doing math that never added up. "That's very generous," he managed. "It's fair," Natalie corrected. "And if Mia ever needs to come along, we'll make it work." "I meant what I said about the drawing wall." Learning a new language the first few weeks passed in a blur of new routines. Daniel drove Natalie to meetings across Chicago, learning the routes and the rhythms of her schedule. He waited outside boardrooms, walked 3 steps behind her at business lunches, and slowly began to understand the language of her world. But what surprised him most were the quiet moments. The times when Natalie would get in the car after a difficult meeting and just sit in silence for a few minutes before speaking. The way she always asked about Mia. The night she noticed he was reading a construction manual during downtime and asked him about it with genuine interest. "I used to build things," Daniel explained. Almost embarrassed. Houses, mostly. "I liked seeing something go from plans on paper to a place where people could live." "Why'd you stop?" Natalie asked. Company went under during the recession. I've been trying to get back into it, but everyone wants younger guys now. Cheaper labor. Natalie was quiet for a moment, looking out at the city lights. I understand that feeling. Of being reduced to a number on a spreadsheet? When Mia became part of the picture, it started small. An afternoon when Daniel's babysitter canceled and he had no choice but to bring Mia to work, Natalie had simply smiled and handed Mia a box of markers. The window is all yours, she'd said. Within an hour, bright flowers and stick figures covered the glass. Natalie had stopped in the middle of a conference call to admire a purple sundot. After that, Mia came more often. She'd sit in the corner of Natalie's office with her coloring books, occasionally asking questions that made Natalie laugh. Daniel watched them together and felt something shift in his chest, something warm and terrifying. One evening as they were leaving, Mia tugged on Natalie's sleeve. "Miss Nat," Mia said carefully, testing out the nickname she'd invented, "do you have a family?" Natalie crouched down, her expression gentle. "Not like yours." "But I had a dad who was really special. Where is he?" Mia asked with the blunt curiosity of childhood. "He died a few years ago," Natalie said softly, "but I think about him every day." Mia considered this, then threw her small arms around Natalie's neck. "I'm sorry your daddy is gone." Daniel watched Natalie's face crumple for just a second before she composed herself, hugging Mia back. When she looked up at Daniel, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. The night everything changed, the charity gala was at the Drake Hotel, all crystal chandeliers and designer gowns. Daniel wore a tuxedo Natalie had arranged, but he still felt like an imposter. He was supposed to stay with the car, but Natalie had insisted he'd come inside. "You're part of my team," she'd said firmly. "You belong here." Belonging and feeling like you belonged were two different things. Daniel stood at the edge of the ballroom, watching Natalie move through the crowd with effortless grace. She laughed at jokes he couldn't hear, shook hands with people whose names appeared in newspapers. She was magnificent and completely out of reach. When she finally escaped to the terrace, Daniel followed. She stood at the railing, looking out over Lake Michigan, her shoulders tight with tension. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She turned, surprised. "I thought you were by the bar. Saw you leave." "You looked like you needed air," Natalie laughed, but it sounded tired. "I hate these things. Everyone wants something, and I'm supposed to smile and pretend I enjoy the game." Daniel moved beside her, close enough to feel the warmth of her arm near his. "You don't have to pretend with me." "I know," she whispered. "That's the problem. You make me want to stop pretending altogether." The truth she'd been hiding, the silence stretched between them. It's filled with the distant sound of music and the lap of water against the shore. Finally, Natalie spoke again, her voice barely audible. "My father built Brooks Industries from nothing. He was brilliant, kind, and completely devoted to making sure I had every opportunity. When he got sick, I was in Paris studying art. I wanted to paint, to create things that made people feel something real." She paused, her hands gripping the railing. "He called me home. Made me promise to take over the company. He died 3 months later, and I've been running it ever since. 5 years of board meetings and profit margins, when all I wanted was a studio and time to think." Daniel felt the weight of her confession settle over him. He understood sacrifice. He understood giving up dreams for responsibility. "Do you still paint?" he asked sometimes. "Late at night, when I can't sleep. But it's not the same. It feels stolen, like I'm betraying his memory by wanting something else." Daniel turned to face her fully. "From what you've told me about your dad, it sounds like he wanted you to be happy. Maybe running his company was his dream, not necessarily yours." Natalie looked at him, really looked, and he saw something break open in her expression. Something vulnerable and true. "No one's ever said that to me before," she whispered. "Then people haven't been paying attention," Daniel said. The distance between them seemed to shrink. He could count her breaths, see the way her lips parted slightly. When she leaned in, he met her halfway. The kiss was soft at first, questioning, then deeper, like coming home after a long absence. Her hands found his lapels, and his arms wrapped around her waist, and for those few seconds, nothing else existed. Not the gala, not their differences, not the complicated reality waiting on the other side of this moment. When they pulled apart, Natalie rested her forehead against his. "This is crazy," she breathed. "Probably," Daniel agreed. "I'm your boss. I know. People will talk. Let them." She laughed then, real and free, and kissed him again under the Chicago stars. The morning after the next day felt different. Daniel drove Natalie to her morning meetings, but now there was an awareness between them that hadn't existed before. Small touches that lingered. Glances that held meaning. At lunch, Natalie asked him to join her in her office. She closed the door and leaned against it, suddenly looking uncertain. "Last night," she began. "If you regret it," Daniel interrupted, "I understand. This is complicated, and I don't want to make your life harder." "That's not what I was going to say," Natalie said quickly. "I was going to say that last night was the first time in years I've felt like myself. Not the CEO, not my father's legacy, just me." She moved closer, her voice dropping. "I don't know where this goes, Daniel. But I don't want to pretend it didn't happen. I don't want to go back to keeping everything professional and distant." Daniel felt relief flood through him. "Good, because I don't think I could go back to that either. It won't be easy," Natalie warned. "My life is complicated. There are expectations, appearances to maintain." "My life isn't exactly simple either," Daniel reminded her. "I'm a single dad working for a woman I'm falling for. But Mia likes you, and that matters more than anything." Natalie's eyes softened. "I like her too. She reminds me that there's still wonder in the world." Building something over the following weeks, they found their rhythm. Daniel and Mia had dinner at Natalie's penthouse on Sundays. Natalie came to Mia's school play, sitting in the back row beside Daniel, applauding until her hands hurt. They stole moments between meetings, quick kisses in the parking garage, phone calls late at night when Mia was asleep one evening. Natalie showed Daniel her personal studio, a converted loft space she rarely visited. Canvases lined the walls, some finished, most abandoned halfway through. "This is incredible," Daniel said, studying a painting of the Chicago skyline at dawn. "Why don't you do more of this?" "Time, energy, fear," maybe Natalie admitted. "It's easier to focus on spreadsheets than on creating something that might fail." Daniel turned to her. "You told me your dad wanted you happy. What would make you happy, Natalie? If you could do anything, what would it be?" She was quiet for a long moment, then spoke carefully, as if testing the words. "I've been thinking about starting something new. A community center for single parents, job training, child care, art programs, something that actually helps people instead of just making money." "That sounds perfect," Daniel said. "It sounds like you?" Natalie smiled, hope flickering in her eyes. "Would you help me? You understand what people need because you've lived it." Daniel pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "I'd be honored." They stood together in that studio, surrounded by half-finished dreams and future possibilities. Daniel realized that catching Natalie on those stairs had been the beginning of something neither of them had expected. Not just love, but a partnership, a chance to build something that mattered. When doubt crept in 3 months into their relationship, Daniel found an envelope on his windshield. Inside was a check for $10,000 and a note in handwriting he didn't recognize for Mia's education. "You're welcome." He confronted Natalie that evening, the check crumpled in his fist. "Did you do this?" he demanded, his voice tight. Natalie looked up from her laptop, confused. "Do what?" He showed her the check. "This, some anonymous donation that just happens to appear after I mentioned Mia's school costs." "Daniel, I didn't," Natalie said, standing. "I wouldn't do something like that without talking to you first." "But someone in your world did," he said, the frustration he'd been swallowing for weeks finally breaking free. "Someone who thinks I'm some charity case you're fixing. Someone who sees exactly what I see when I look in the mirror. A guy who doesn't belong in your life." Natalie's face hardened. "Don't do that. Don't put words in my mouth or assume you know what I think. And tell me," Daniel said. "Tell me this isn't about you feeling guilty for having so much while I have so little. Tell me you don't see me as some project you're rescuing." The silence that followed was heavy and painful. When Natalie finally spoke, her voice was steady, but her eyes were bright. "You want to know what I see?" she said. "I see a man who caught me when I was falling, literally and figuratively. I see someone who shows up every single day for his daughter without complaint. I see someone who makes me laugh and calls me out when I'm being too rigid. I see someone I'm falling in love with, and yes, that terrifies me." Daniel felt his anger drain away, replaced by something equally intense. "I'm falling for you too. That's why this scares me. Because what happens when reality catches up? When your board finds out you're dating the help? When photographers catch us together and the questions start? Then we deal with it," Natalie said firmly. "Together. But you have to trust that I'm in this for the right reasons. Not pity, not guilt. Because you make me want to be honest about who I am and what I want." Daniel stepped closer, his voice dropping. "And what do you want?" "You," she whispered. "Mia. A life that isn't scripted by expectations. The freedom to build something real." He kissed her then, pouring all his fear and hope into that moment. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm not used to people sticking around." "Get used to it," Natalie replied. "Because I'm not going anywhere." The project that changed everything, they threw themselves into planning the community center. Natalie found a property on the south side, an old warehouse with good bones, but decades of neglect. Daniel walked through it with her, pointing out what could be saved and what needed replacing. "This space could be childcare," he said, gesturing to a sun-filled corner. "And over here, computer labs for job training." Natalie took notes, her eyes bright with excitement. This was different from her corporate work. This was personal. This mattered. They brought Mia to see the space one Saturday. She ran through the empty rooms, her laughter echoing off concrete walls. "Daddy. It's like a castle that needs fixing," she called out. "Exactly right." "Sweetheart," Daniel said, grinning. Natalie watched them together, and something in her chest expanded. This was what family looked like. Not perfect, not polished, but real. When the world found out the news broke on a Tuesday morning, someone had photographed Daniel and Natalie at a coffee shop, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. The headline read, "Brooks Industries CEO's Secret Romance with Employee." Daniel's phone exploded with messages. Reporters camped outside his apartment building. At the office, whispers followed him down every hallway. Natalie called an emergency board meeting. She stood at the head of the conference table, her spine straight, her voice unwavering. "I'm in a relationship with Daniel Hayes," she said clearly. "It's serious, it's consensual, and it's nobody's business but ours. If anyone has concerns about conflicts of interest, we can discuss restructuring his role. But I won't apologize for my personal life, and I won't tolerate harassment of my staff." The board members shifted uncomfortably. Finally, the oldest member spoke. "Your father built this company on integrity," he said. "What you do reflects on all of us." "My father built this company on hard work and treating people fairly," Natalie corrected. Daniel embodies both those values. If you can't accept that, we have bigger problems than tabloid gossip. She won the argument through sheer force of will, but Daniel saw the cost in her eyes when she finally sat down beside him in the car. "You shouldn't have had to defend us like that," he said quietly. "Yes, I should," Natalie replied. "Because you're worth defending. We're worth defending." Mia's question that night, after the media storm had died down to a manageable roar, Mia asked the question Daniel had been dreading. "Daddy, is Miss Nat your girlfriend?" They were sitting at the kitchen table, homework spread between them. Daniel glanced at Natalie, who had become a fixture in their apartment. Her shoes by the door, her coffee mug in the cabinet. "Yes, baby," Daniel said carefully. "Is that okay with you?" Mia was quiet for a moment, her crayon moving across paper. Then she looked up with those serious 6-year-old eyes. "Will she leave like Mommy did?" The question punched the air from Daniel's lungs. His ex-wife had walked out when Mia was 2, unable to handle motherhood, leaving nothing but silence and abandonment in her wake. Before Daniel could answer, Natalie knelt beside Mia's chair. "Your daddy told me about your mom," she said gently, "and I'm sorry that happened. But I need you to know something important. I'm not going anywhere. I care about you and your dad too much to leave. Promise? Mia whispered. I promise, Natalie said. Is it okay if I stay? Mia threw her arms around Natalie's neck. Yes, I want you to stay forever. Over Mia's shoulder, Natalie met Daniel's eyes, and he saw tears streaming down her face. Happy tears. Healing tears. The grand opening 6 months later, the Hayesbrooks Community Center opened its doors. The warehouse had been transformed into something beautiful and functional. Bright murals covered the walls, painted by local artists. Sunlight poured through new windows. The space hummed with possibility at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Daniel stood beside Natalie, Mia between them holding both their hands. News cameras captured the moment. But this time the story was about what they'd built together, not who they were dating. This center represents everything I believe in, Natalie told the crowd. Second chances, community support, and the understanding that everyone deserves help sometimes. None of this would exist without Daniel Hayes, who showed me that the most important things we build aren't made of steel and glass, but of hope and human connection. After the speeches, after the tours, and congratulations, Daniel pulled Natalie aside to a quiet corner of the building. His heart was hammering, his hands sweaty. I have something to ask you, he said. Natalie smiled. You look terrified. Should I be worried? Maybe, Daniel admitted. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple silver ring. Nothing fancy, nothing that screamed wealth. Just honest and real, like everything between them. Natalie Brooks, you caught me just as much as I caught you that day on the stairs. You've given Mia and me a life I never dreamed possible. But more than that, you've given us yourself. Your laughter, your strength, your heart. So I'm asking, will you marry me? Will you build the rest of this life with us? Natalie's hand flew to her mouth, tears already falling. Yes, she breathed. Yes, absolutely yes. Daniel slipped the ring on her finger and she kissed him like they were the only two people in the world. When they finally broke apart, they realized Mia had found them, her eyes wide. Does this mean Miss Nat is going to be my mom? Mia asked. Natalie crouched down, taking Mia's small hands in hers. If you want me to be, I would be so honored. Mia's answer was to launch herself into Natalie's arms, and Daniel wrapped his arms around both of them. His family complete at last. 6 months later, the wedding was small. Held in the garden of the community center they'd built together. Mia was the flower girl, taking her job so seriously that she counted every petal as she dropped it. Daniel's construction crew sat beside Natalie's executive team. Mrs. Patterson dabbed at her eyes throughout the ceremony. When Daniel and Natalie exchanged vows, they spoke not just of love, but of partnership, of building something that would last not because it was perfect, but because they'd choose each other every day. You showed me that falling isn't the end, Natalie said, her voice clear and steady. Sometimes it's the beginning. You caught me, and I'm never letting go. You gave me back my future, Daniel replied. And I promise to spend every day proving I'm worthy of that gift. As they kissed to applause and cheers, Mia squeezed between them, her small voice rising above the celebration. We're a family now, she announced to everyone. Forever and ever. And in that moment, standing in the garden of the place they'd built together, surrounded by people from both their worlds who had learned to blend, Daniel knew she was right.